We now move to the next debate, which is the Welsh Liberal Democrats debate, and I call on Veronica German to move the motion. Veronica German.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Back in the 1970s and the 1980s, nearly 5,000 patients in Britain were infected with hepatitis C, or HIV, after being given blood-infected transfusions by the NHS. And since that time, 1,700 people have died as a direct result of the blood that they were given at an NHS hospital. In addition to these deaths, hundreds of other people have had their lives devastated by these infections. Many people have had to give up work or greatly reduce their working hours as a result of their debilitating conditions, which obviously results in a greatly reduced income. Many people infected with these viruses require carers to look after them and have experienced drastic changes to their lives and, of course, the lives of their families since becoming infected. It is essential that people who are suffering as a result of treatment they received from the NHS receive as much support as possible. Until now, that financial support has been patchy at best, and there has been a distinct difference between payments issued to people who contracted HIV and those who contracted hepatitis C. It should have been a matter of priority for governments to respond to the issue as promptly as possible, as the Irish did, but unfortunately successive governments did not take the necessary action. With hindsight, it's easy to see the mistakes that were made. Contaminated blood concentrate obtained from paid donors in an unregulated market in the United States in the 70s was imported to the UK and used routinely in the NHS. The United Kingdom was a long way from being self-sufficient in blood products and relied on imports from the US, even though the quality of the blood product could not be guaranteed. The groups of people who were most likely to sell their blood were statistically more likely to be those who were more susceptible to infections. They were more likely to have underlying health conditions, patchy medical backgrounds, and were more likely to conceal other medical details. In addition, a large proportion of blood products came from prisoners, another group of people who are statistically more susceptible to infections. At that time, hepatitis C was unknown, and so, of course, there was no screening for the virus. Fortunately today, stricter regulations and better screening means that this is hopefully very unlikely to happen again. However, there are always new viruses being discovered, and therefore it's crucial for governments to keep up to date with this and to ensure that screening techniques keep pace with the identification of new viruses. Successive governments have failed to tackle the issue. In 2007, an inquiry was conducted into the cases, but unfortunately that inquiry had to be funded privately rather than by the government, as the then Labour government claimed that the treatment was given in good faith and that therefore there was nothing the government could do. On top of the individual tragedies, the other tragedy is that it has taken so long for governments to take action to attempt to put this right. The fact that in 2007 the government would not look at the issue is a shocking indictment. An issue as serious as this should never have been ignored and left to the Lord Archer's Committee, made up of volunteers, paid for by private donations, to investigate. That inquiry made several recommendations to the government, the majority of which, fortunately, have since been implemented by the UK government. Finally, in October last year, the new coalition government in Westminster announced that it would review the funding support given to patients who were infected as a result of receiving contaminated blood. Specifically, the government wanted to redress the inequality between the HIV and hepatitis C support packages. In January, these changes were announced that saw a dramatic improvement in the support packages available for people with hepatitis C in England, which will substantially improve people's quality of life. As yet, there has not been any such announcement in Wales. The purpose of our debate this afternoon is to call on the government to come forward with a set of proposals at least as good as those announced for England, for those people in Wales living with hepatitis C as a result of NHS blood transfusions. Thank you.
I have selected the amendment to the motion. I call on the Minister for Health and Social Services to move formally the amendment tabled in the name of Jane Hutt.
Formally, Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. Kirsty Williams.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. Very grateful for the opportunity to speak in this debate, and these issues have long exercised the National Assembly for Wales for very many years. I think if we go back to the first Assembly, the then Health Minister took evidence on this issue, and it's been a long time in coming to the point where we are now, where hopefully we're going to finally complete the picture of support. And we need the Assembly Government now, I would argue, to act responsibly and quickly to the UK Government's report into financial support for people who contracted hepatitis C as a result of those NHS blood transfusions. The UK Government has reversed years of inaction by settling the inequality that existed between those patients with HIV and those with hepatitis C. So far, the Welsh Assembly Government has not come forward to say how it will respond for patients and their families living in Wales. And over the last few weeks, the Government has been asked again and again and again by Liberal Democrats and Jonathan Morgan from the Conservative benches to make a formal statement on how it intends to respond. But to date, as we all know, we have no response from the Government. Now, the Government says that it needs time to consider the report, and that is not an unreasonable thing to ask, and to assess what the impact of that report would be in Wales if it were to follow what the UK Government has done in England. We are all too aware now that when the Business Minister first responded, she claimed that the Government here in Wales had not had sight of the report before it was published, and so therefore needing that additional time to consider its own response. But as was highlighted last week and again yesterday by Jonathan Morgan, it seems that the Welsh Assembly Government have been involved in that process and have had sight of a number of documents, including the direction of travel and the likelihood of what the English solution was going to be in the months running up to that UK decision. On December the 1st, the draft of the clinical report was shared with the Assembly Government, and on the 17th of December, further cost estimates were again shared with the Assembly Government. Given that the action that the UK Government has taken, it would be very difficult indeed, I would argue, for the Assembly Government not to offer a package of support which is at least as generous as the UK Government's offer for English citizens. If the two packages were to be significantly less than what's been offered in England, there's a real danger that people would be left out and let down. For example, may I raise the case of Dr. Ted Wolfenden from Clydach, and I have permission, Deputy Presiding Officer, to use his name in this debate this afternoon. He had been living in Wokingham for many years, but for personal reasons moved back to Wales. Had he stayed in Wokingham, he could have been eligible for the support offered by the UK Government. If the Welsh Assembly Government does not offer a similar support package, then people like Dr. Wolfenden may well lose out. The UK Government arrived at its decision to provide more financial support after speaking to the views of those affected, their families, and those that have campaigned alongside them, who have all been fighting for years for more support from the Government. One of the findings from the Archer inquiry into the case highlighted the fact that one of the biggest problems through the years has been the unwillingness of governments to keep those who were affected informed of what was been going on. Not only was there very little support, but there was very little indication from the Government as to whether they were ever likely to get additional support, or if their campaign was a hopeless case. This is such an easy thing to put right. The Welsh Assembly Government should follow the lead set by the UK Government and decide quickly how it intends to support these patients to put their minds at ease. Let's not keep these patients waiting any longer. At present, there are a considerable amount of mixed messages out there. For example, several people have tried to claim compensation from the Government and have taken cases to the High Court. Several of these cases have been lost for different reasons, usually for technical reasons, which is why it is even more important that the Government steps in and provides the financial support to meet the needs of those affected by these tragic set of circumstances.
Excuse me, Helen Mary Jones.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm sure that many of us will have had constituents bring cases relating to this matter to us and will have been very much struck not only by the difficulties of living with a highly distressing condition that can in fact deteriorate into a very dangerous one, but also the ongoing sense of injustice from the hepatitis C patients who did not feel that they had been treated fairly in comparison with patients with HIV. And Kirsty Williams is of course right to remind us that this is an issue that's been raised on a number of occasions over the years here in this Assembly. It has taken much too long for UK government to respond, and I'm sure that we'd all welcome the fact that there is now a substantive report on which further progress can be based. And I'm sure we would all wish, of course, our Minister to respond as soon as possible. But there are a number of complex moral, legal and financial issues that need to be addressed here. And I'm sure that we would also all wish to ensure that patients in Wales got the best possible deal. And that might not just necessarily mean rubber stamping what's been offered in England. I mean, there are issues in the report that relate to England that aren't relevant to us. There's a whole section, for example, on prescription charges, which are clearly not relevant to us. Now, that, of course, is simple for our government to deal with. They just need to put a red line through it because that doesn't apply. But there are other complex issues, and we need to make sure that those are responded to effectively. I mean, a question for me, of course, is whether or not, and perhaps this is more of an issue now when money is so tight, but whether the Assembly government should be liable for actions that were undertaken by the previous Department of Health many, many years ago. Now, I'm sure that none of us would wish for patients' redress to be delayed while those issues were being discussed. But I think it is something, and I don't know if this is a matter that the Minister's considering, perhaps she will be able to tell us, but I think this is an issue that may need consideration. We may also need to consider how we cooperate with the other devolved administrations. It may even be possible, and we all know our Minister's working in very tight financial constraints, it may be possible for our Minister to be more generous, for example, to the families of sufferers with hepatitis C who have not had the same treatment as those as the families of sufferers from HIV. So, like everybody else in the chamber today, I do urge the Minister to act as quickly as possible, but perhaps my emphasis would be on the as possible, and to make sure that whatever package of redress is eventually made available to these patients and hopefully to their families, it is the best possible package that we can attain and can afford. People who've been waiting many, many years, nobody wants them to wait any longer than necessary, but I'm sure that for those families to wait a few more weeks and get the best possible outcome is better than rushing and possibly getting a botched result. Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer.
Helena Burnham.
Well,
thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer.
Good, and I feel quite queasy actually talking about it, but I'm very grateful to be, in all seriousness, discussing this very important issue. It is very serious, and I do welcome, like the others have said, the UK Government's recent announcement, and also welcome the fact that the Health Minister, Andrew Lansley, has reassured Parliament that he will try to ensure that payments are made as soon as possible, because after all, we have had many years of delay, and this must be very reassuring for the people affected and their families. I believe that taken together, these announcements represent a significant rise in the support available to those affected by this tragedy. The government estimates that the package of support that is being offered is between 100 and 130 million worth of additional support over the course of this Parliament. It's a considerable sum of money, and it goes to show just how many people have been affected by this dreadful situation. The UK Health Minister has promised that he will be working with the devolved administrations to try and extend the payments beyond England. And we have to remember that this is one example where the NHS trying to treat people actually resulted in causing them almost more harm, well, more harm than they had previously suffered. It's tragic, and the examples of people contracting these fatal diseases and illnesses whilst in NH care, thankfully, is rare. And we should remember the tremendous hard work that occurs on a daily basis within the NHS. There are lessons that can be learnt. Lord Archer's report points out that blood products today are regularly tested for syphilis, hepatitis B, C, HIV and other viruses. But we have to remember that these patients contracted hepatitis C or HIV before we really knew or understood much about either viruses. I believe the most important thing for the future is that the government ensures policies are up to date and able to adapt to the changing circumstances in order to ensure that any new viruses identified in the future are similarly tested and kept out of the blood donation system, which is absolutely essential. We now rely more and more on blood transfusions and blood products than ever before. We use around 5 times more blood products than we did when these cases occurred, and so obviously the risks attached are much greater. And ultimately, I believe the government needs to ensure that the rates of hepatitis C are as low as possible, and that's why early detection is obviously absolutely essential. Hepatitis C can be cured, and I believe that 40 to 85% of cases, in 40 to 85% of cases, it is cured. And I understand that obviously that early detection is absolutely essential. Diolch.
Nick Ramsey.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And I too am very grateful to the Liberal Democrats for bringing this important and thought-provoking debate forward today. And can I, in a similar vein to Kirsty Williams' comments earlier, also welcome the decision of the UK Government to provide financial support to people in England who have been affected with hepatitis C from receiving contaminated blood transfusions. We are supporting this motion. We're also calling on the government, the Welsh Government, to do what it can to mirror the policy being followed in England. And whilst listening to Helen Mary Jones' comments earlier, I think I understood the gist of what you were saying in terms of that these people have waited a long time till now. But I don't think I would use the language that a few more weeks doesn't matter. I don't think that is really helpful to those people out there. But as I say, I don't think Helen Mary Jones meant it in the way that came across. Yeah, definitely. Sure.
Thank you, Nick. I'm sorry if that was what you heard. What I said was that none of us would want anybody to wait any longer than they had to, but that it might be better to wait a little bit longer and then get the best possible result rather than to rush to something that proved less than adequate, particularly if there was any possibility, and the Minister will be able to tell us if there is, that we may be able to do a slightly more generous deal here for patients, which I'm sure you and others would welcome if it were possible.
Nick Ramsey?
Hear your clarification on that, Helen Mary. I do think that the government does need to deal with this situation as quickly as possible. Now, what number of people are we dealing with? Before heat treatment of blood supplies was introduced in 1985 and a test for hepatitis C was developed in 1991, there were over 4,675 haemophiliacs in the UK who were infected with hepatitis C by NHS blood products in the 1970s and 1980s. The expert scientific review that has been undertaken has put forward a number of options considered for payments to individuals affected by hepatitis C, and these are listed on page 15 and 16 of this fascinating report. Different options were provided in England, ranging from keeping stage 1 and 2 payments at current levels, which should have seen no financial impact, ranging from that to increasing stage 2 payments by £25,000, both prospectively and retrospectively, at a cost of £19 million in the first year of operation. Now, we know that the previous UK government was unwilling to look at change in the system of recompense, and there was a wider unwillingness, certainly, to follow the Irish model. But I'm very pleased that, as has been said, Andrew Lansley has now decided that the right path it should be taken in England, and that appropriate compensation should be provided. We're looking at the introduction of a flat rate payment of £12,000 for the Living Skipton Fund Stage 2 recipients, uprated to keep up with inflation, providing £100,000 per annum to third sector organisations over the next 3 years to provide additional access to counselling for people who have been affected. This report has been received as a government as a balanced package of support, and the UK's government response to it, I think, was very significant. The UK government has therefore gone down this path. We take on board what the Liberal Democrats have been trying to achieve by this motion. This is a complicated area. It is an area which is very sensitive, and which I think it is important that the Welsh Assembly Government does indeed, as Helen Mary Jones said, provide not necessarily the same solution as in England, but one that can be suited to Welsh needs. As a result of the government review, Andrew Lansley confirmed that the amount of the second payment would rise to £50,000, and as I said before, the government is introducing a new annual payment of £12,800. The case for greater similarity between ex gratia payments for HIV and hepatitis C infection is based on the arguments that the impact on quality of life of living with chronic hepatitis C, and I recognise this motion specifically refers to that, it is at least as great as that of living with HIV. We support this motion, Deputy Presiding Officer. I do say that I do recognise the difficulties the Assembly Government may have at this time of meeting this obligation, and I do find it slightly ironic that the Liberal Democrats are asking the Government to take this course of action at the same time, and only in the previous debate the Welsh Conservatives were lambasted for looking to protect the health budget in Wales. Clearly, if you're taking money out of the health budget, then it does become, over 3 years, it becomes increasingly difficult to honour these commitments. But we support this motion, and I look forward to hearing the Government's response.
Lorraine Barrett.
Thanks very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. Just a few words. I was really interested in what Helen Mary Jones said and her sort of take on the situation. And whilst we can welcome the decision made by the UK Government, the haemophiliac Society still has reservations and has raised a whole raft of issues that they feel still need to be addressed. And it is a difficult subject. I don't want to play a sort of political ping-pong here across the chamber with people's lives in this way. I would have been concerned to sort of be seen to be rejecting this motion, but I did feel a bit better when I saw the amendment put down on behalf of the government that the government will consider the UK Department's review of support for people affected in this way, and will consult with interested parties, and that's what's needed now. It has been going on a long time. But the other reason that I wanted to just say something was I had an email today. I haven't had permission to use the family name, but it's from a young family who live in my constituency, and the husband was infected with hepatitis C via contaminated blood products. He now has liver damage. It's devastated the family's lives. They've got small children, and the point was made to me that it's all right to offer compensation, but when you're a family, you've got a family growing up, you have social economic needs that may be different to older people perhaps. There are other needs that this family is desperately crying out for, and support that they are crying out for. So I know our hearts go out to all these people affected in this way, and I just look forward to hearing from the Minister what she might be able to offer by way of support for these families. Thank you.
Jonathan Morgan.
Deputy Presiding Officer, could I start by welcoming the fact that we are able to discuss this matter here this afternoon, and to thank the Liberal Democrats for tabling this debate here. It's the only opportunity, of course, that we've had to discuss the matter, as the Assembly Government has not been forthcoming with a statement. Now, for whatever reason the Assembly Government have not been forthcoming with that statement, I think it's important this afternoon that if the Minister is unable to tell us about the way in which the Assembly Government is able to help and support those people in Wales who are suffering as a result of contaminated blood, I think they need an answer as to why that detail can't be made available today. The difficulty we've had is that in the past 5 weeks, where I've asked for a statement from the Minister for Assembly Business has simply said that we're merely looking at the reports and considering the information in order to come to a view. Now, I just don't think that's good enough, because the people of Wales and those people suffering in Wales know that the Assembly Government had full sight of the report of the Clinical Expert Reference Group. They had that in December. The people of Wales also know that the Assembly Government were given the cost estimates of the schemes that were being considered by the Department of Health. And that information was made available in December. January the 10th was not the first time that the Assembly government officials have had sight of the report that was announced by Andrew Lansley. And I think it's important, therefore, that those people who are suffering get a better understanding from the Minister and the government as to why they're being asked to wait a bit longer. Because the difficulty is that with so many people in Britain who've been infected through contaminated blood, so many people now living in England who will benefit as a result of the scheme, you now have people living in Wales who are wondering why we're not acting quickly enough in responding to the situation that they face. And I don't think the Business Minister, when she has come to this chamber now on 5 occasions, has been adequate in the explanation as to why we are where we are without detail from government. Now, it can't be down to a lack of information, because we know the government had the information. It can't be down to a lack of ministerial support, because I would imagine that the Minister will want to resolve this as quickly as possible. So we know, in a sense, that the will is there. It can't be, I can't imagine it is this, it can't be down to a lack of money, because that would just be plain crass. So there must be some sort of dispute, some sort of problem between what the UK government has announced for England and what the Assembly government is looking at for Wales. There must be some problem that we're not being told about. I just think this level of secrecy almost is unacceptable. I think people need to know where we are, what's being looked at, what the problem of the detail is, what the Assembly government was given in December, and why it's unable to make a statement now. And I think that they need to know the reasons behind that. I think that the Assembly government needs to say today that if there is a difficulty, what that difficulty is, how quickly they think the problem will be resolved, and when the Minister thinks that she may be in a position to come forward with a scheme that will provide that support and that help and that assistance to those people in Wales who are suffering. I think that the Minister needs to give a better response today than we've seen from Jane Hutt on the past 5 occasions that I've raised it with her here in the chamber. And I don't think it's acceptable that we would ask people in Wales to wait a few more weeks just before they get a bit more information. I think now, today, this afternoon, that's the time when people in Wales need to know where we are with this extremely important scheme, because there are people here today who are still completely in the dark as to what the Assembly government is going to be able to do on their behalf.
I call on the Minister to speak on behalf of the Government. Edwina Hart.
Thank you very much indeed, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I thank the Liberal Democrats for tabling this debate. It relates to an important, as Nick Ramsey said, a very sensitive issue, which is precisely why I've been consulted with affected parties. Can I thank Veronica German for her opening remarks, which I think set the issue totally in context for the discussion we're having in the Chamber today. If I may, I would like to address the points raised in respect of the report and information received by the Welsh Assembly Government. The final report published on the 10th of January, entitled Review of the Support Available to Individuals Infected with Hepatitis C and or HIV by an NHS-supplied blood transfusion or blood products and their dependents, was not shared with me before the publication date. What had been shared with my officials was a draft on expert scientific assessment, which appears in the final report at Annex 4. This draft provided a scientific assessment of the natural history of hepatitis C infection. It suggests criteria to weigh in deciding who payment might be made to, but it is advice only and in draft. It does not contain any steer on the likely policy direction the Department of Health ministers might have taken. In respect to the cost estimates received, officials did receive information from the Department of Health in emails on the 4th and 17th of December, providing cost estimates at the UK level. But again, there was nothing in the correspondence which indicated a likely policy direction from the Department of Health ministers. Both the draft assessment of the clinical expert group and the provisional cost estimates were shared on the basis of being very much work in progress, and no further information was received. Indeed, officials in all the devolved administrations were informed by a teleconference on the 22nd of December that the Department of Health was unable to share the review's report or any detailed recommendations before publication. I subsequently wrote to Anne Milton MP expressing my disappointment that I would not have cited the report and its recommendations before the announcement. I do remain concerned there was not full consultation or cooperation with devolved ministers, as promised by Anne Milton MP in her letter to me dated the 13th of October, when she announced the review. Now, as Health Minister, I, along with my counterparts in Scotland and Northern Ireland, have also obviously discussed this issue, and I have in fact written to the Minister of Health today expressing some concerns. However, let's be absolutely frank, we've had a good discussion today. I wish to put the issue of intergovernmental relationships aside, as the issue for us is about the impact on the individual, and that was very much the context that the Liberal Democrat Health spokesperson actually started the debate on. It is only proper that I give these vitally important issues my full consideration before proceeding. I recently met with the Haemophilia Society, representing concerned groups, families and individuals who are affected by these issues. This was an important opportunity for me to hear at first hand their views about the Department of Health's report. The Society had several concerns about the recommendations in the DH report. The Society felt that the overall level of payment recommended in the DH report does not reflect the impact of the viruses. There was no financial help for people with hepatitis C whose employment and quality of life were affected but didn't qualify for stage 2 payments. The group emphasised at the meeting that all infected patients need support due to the need for intensive treatment requiring time off work, and that several were unable to hold down jobs, particularly if employers were unsympathetic, even if they had developed severe liver disease. They advised me that it was wrong to only support patients with certain findings on a liver biopsy. Indeed, this would force patients to seek liver biopsies for financial reasons, whereas they are normally performed every 5 years for purely clinical reasons. Members will be aware that a liver biopsy is not a pleasant experience at any time, and not without risk in a patient with haemophilia and bleeding problems. We discussed the invasive nature of the biopsy, and they expressed concern that there was no NHS access to a fibroscan in Wales. I am pleased to say that this issue is now being resolved, and as part of the overall funding package I agreed for year 1 of the Bloodborne Viral Hepatitis Action Plan, Cardiff and the Vale LHB are purchasing a fibroscanner. As a result of other issues they raised with me, I have asked Dr Chris Jones, my medical director, to undertake a review of the services that are provided to these individuals. They was also concerned that there was no criteria for the discretionary fund proposed by DH, and there was no allowance for problems in obtaining insurance. I was also advised by those affected by these issues it is unreasonable for widows to have to provide evidence of infection by contaminated blood. In fact, I was told it was not possible for infusions prior to 1981, when blood testing for hepatitis C was first introduced. I've been especially struck by the tragic stories, as will all members here who've had them come into their constituencies, about what happens with members of their families and those with haemophilia. While haemophilia has been mild sometimes in their families before, people have lived to a good age. Now we see families, we see individuals much younger dying of liver disease as a result of contaminated blood. This naturally causes them concern about how their families will be provided for, but after they've gone, there's life insurance. It's not just an option for them in this regard. So I am aware of the need to proceed with the matter as quickly as possible, but members must understand, I think as Helen Murray-Jones said, there are complex moral, legal and financial issues to be considered here. The support provided to those affected by contaminated blood is an UK-wide arrangement. The fact that DOH took the decision unilaterally to implement the recommendations of the review has put additional financial pressure on the budget of the Welsh Assembly Government without our agreement. I need to give careful consideration before proceeding. I certainly need to have further discussions with those affected and other interested parties before making a final decision. And as of today, I am aware that my counterparts in Scotland and Northern Ireland are also considering the position with regard to this. But can I assure members, and I understand the heartfelt comments that have been made here today by everybody that spoke, Jonathan when he's raised it, that we want this matter resolved quickly. I hope very much I can conclude my meetings during the course of next week, and I will of course come to the Chamber as soon as my decision is being made. But some of the representations that have been made to me, I do wish to give further consideration to.
Jenny Rannis to reply to the debate.
Thank you very much. And I think as a debate it's been very helpful, and I want to thank everyone who's participated. And many members will be aware of my long-standing interest in this issue, and I know that both Jane Hutt and Brian Gibbons, when they were health ministers, were subject to my pressure on this issue, and I went to see them and corresponded with them fully on the issue. simply because, like other members here, I had constituents indeed. Sadly, two of them have died. And I had constituents who were very much affected by this and were strongly campaigning on it. Now, at the time when I went to see Brian Gibbons and Jane Hutt, their line was very clear. They were not able to do anything different from the UK government. And of course, at that time, the UK government was not doing anything on this issue. So I have to say that I am now very worried that the Health Minister and members from the government side are actually taking the line that you don't follow the UK government necessarily on this issue. Because up to now, the line has been, we have to do what the UK government is doing. I'll happily take it in.
Minister?
No, can I make it clear that I made my statement today absolutely in good faith, outlining my position of discussions. I've never indicated what I'm going to do, and I've never indicated that I wouldn't take the same decision as the government in the UK has taken in any of my contribution today.
Jenny Randerson?
Well, I'm happy to hear that, Minister, but you will be aware that Helen Mary Jones raised the issue of whether it was right that we should be here in Wales funding something, that it should be the UK government. That was never something that your predecessors raised, and I would be delighted to have your confirmation that you accept that the funding of this has to be from Wales. And I think that given that the amount of money, as Nick Ramsey said, the amount of money is extremely small. It's actually of the order of about £5 million over the term of the next Assembly. The amount of money cannot possibly be the problem here. And I think the government needs to bear in mind that the public perception of this will be very poor if it is an issue of money. Now, moving on to the contributions to the debate and the whole issue, there has, of course, never been a proper public inquiry on this issue. The nearest we got to it was the Archer inquiry, which did a superb job, but was funded, of course, from voluntary donations. And I think it is important that we bear in mind that for the families of the sufferers and those affected directly, the issue of culpability, the issue of who is responsible, still remains a strong point. And Lorraine raised the issue of the fact that the Haemophilia Society still has issues about this. And I know that there are still comparisons with the situation in Ireland where responsibility has been accepted. But of course, as was pointed out, this was a Department of Health thing. This culpability is not something one would expect the Welsh Assembly government to address in any response. Now, Helen Mary Jones says the government shouldn't rush. Now, I would point out that the review in England was not even announced until October, and yet we know from evidence that Jonathan has given that the draft report was shared with the Assembly by the beginning of December. So this is not something which took a long time. That is not something which the Assembly government has suddenly to get up to speed with in a great big hurry, mountains of work to assimilate and so on. This is a clear and simple situation. Cost estimates, as Jonathan has pointed out, were shared on the 14th of December and options were shared on the 17th of December. The Minister has stated that they were not shared with her, but with all due respect, Minister, your officials should be sharing something as crucial as that with you, given that there was obviously a rapid timescale. And I would say to Helen Mary, time is of the essence here, and it is an important factor. I want to draw the attention of the Assembly to the words of Diane Abbott in the House of Commons when she thanked the Minister for the statement. She said, when we remember that more than 4,500 completely innocent and trusting patients contracted HIV, hepatitis C, or both as a consequence of tainted blood, and that more than 1,900 have died, leaving thousands of dependents behind, we should resolve as a House that it should never again take 25 years for perfectly innocent victims of errors and mistakes to have proper justice and recompense. And I don't believe that here in the Assembly we should make it even longer than the terrible period that they have suffered so far. Now, Jonathan referred to the mystery over the delay. I think the Minister has answered some of the points in that. And I think that it is important to point out to Lorraine as well. You referred to the needs of younger families, and of course the UK government did announce that it was setting up a new trust that would be funded to deal with that kind of issue. The Minister was talking about the need for further consideration. I would say to you, Minister, I realise this is a complex issue. You only have to read the statement and the questions, and indeed, I went up for that statement. To me, it was a bittersweet day. It was a very sweet day to hear that statement, but it was a very sad day because my two constituents died within the couple of months immediately prior to that statement. But the issue is that it is a very complex settlement, and I understand that, Minister. But time is of the essence, and I emphasise that my constituents died within those couple of months for a reason, because they have left behind, one of them has left behind a widow who is also infected. Time is of the essence to those who remain. And every week, every month that they wait for the finance that they are entitled to, for the daily assistance that finance would provide for them, every week that they wait is a week of pain for them. And it's a week where the pain is not just physical pain and discomfort that extra money would help them with. It is also a mental anguish because for 25 years they know that they have been denied justice. This money will not bring them that justice in itself, but it will do a great deal to alleviate that daily anguish. And Minister, I ask you, please set aside your arguments with the UK government about the process and please provide them with an answer as soon as possible.
The proposal is to agree the motion without amendment. Does anybody object? Object. I will defer all voting on this item until voting time. I propose to move straight to the vote. Anyone wish to have the bell? No? Nobody object. So the first vote then is on the Welsh Conservatives debate, and I call for a vote on the motion which is tabled in the name of Nick Ramsey. Now, if the proposal is not agreed, we will vote on the amendments tabled to the motion. Open the vote. Close the vote. In favour 17, no abstentions, 31 against. Therefore, that is not agreed. I now call for a vote on Amendment 1, which is tabled in the name of Jane Hutt. Open the vote. Close the vote. In favour 38, no abstentions, 11 against. Therefore, Amendment 1 is carried. I now call for a vote on Amendment 2, which is tabled in the name of Peter Black. Open the vote. Close the vote. In favour 38, no abstentions, 11 against. Therefore, Amendment 2 is agreed. I now call for a vote on the motion as amended. Open the vote. Close the vote. In favour 38, 11 abstentions, none against. Therefore, the amended motion is carried. We now move to the vote on the Welsh Liberal Democrats debate. And I will call for a vote on the motion, which is tabled in the name of Peter Black. Again, if the proposal is not agreed, we will vote on the amendments tabled to the motion. Open the vote. Close the vote. In favour 16 and abstentions 33 against. Therefore, the motion falls.